Hello and welcome to the panel. Thank you all for being here. It's really great to have all of you with your various perspectives from both sides of the Atlantic. We are now going to pick up on the conversation from the industry perspective. We've heard quite articulately from the government defense ministry side of things what it takes to ramp up the defense industry. Now we're going to hear it from the people who are actually making it happen. The order of the day is increasing defense production. We're now 2.5 years into the war, and since the beginning, there was an urgency and a feeling that we really had to get NATO's member states' defense production moving faster at a higher volume. And today, the Defense Industrial Pledge, in some ways, is a sign that that hasn't happened. And we want to understand what is going well, what's not. So I start by asking the panel, and we could just go down the panel. How is the ramp up going from your perspective? What's working and what's not?
Sure, I'll start with thank you very much for the invite, Chris Calio from RTX. Surrounded by our customers here, I'd be hard-pressed to say that we're where we want to be on the ramp-up. All the discussions that are here are we need more, we need them faster. In some cases, I would say we've done okay. I mean, if you think about Stinger, we were doing that from a standstill to where we are now. If you think about Patriot, we were doing that from a standstill in 2020 to where we are now. But there are other places where we just haven't ramped as quickly, and there's a host of reasons that we were talking in the back about, but I can just assure everyone here that it's not for lack of investment, it's not for lack of hiring and building capacity. And if you're asking me what's going well thus far, I will tell you it's the partnership that we've been able to forge to create more capacity. I mean, there's great examples on this stage with me today, right? Nammo with rocket motor production, MBDA on GEM-T, production. So I will tell you, those are the things that are going well, but we need to do more and we need to do it faster.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Charles Woodburn, BAE Systems. I think the last panel actually touched on some of these elements. For those who saw it, apologies for the repeat, but one of the issues that we all faced was when the war started, we could scale up production out of our existing manufacturing footprint, and in many cases double or maybe get 2.5 times the output just by running the production facilities at, flat out, adding shifts. But that's kind of the limit to what you can get, and then adding capacity, by which I mean buildings, production equipment, training, testing and commissioning equipment. With the best will in the world, that's a couple of years, and unfortunately we did start a lot of that in the months immediately following Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. However, it takes time for that capacity to come on stream, and much of that now is coming on stream towards the back end of this year. And for example, in the UK, we've scaled our 155 production by 8-fold. And again, that comes on course over the course of this year. But it does take that time to actually put new footprint in place. And that's, in a sense, what we're living through. And just as Chris mentioned, I think there has been a lot of cooperation within industry, because certainly scaling on munitions in particular, you immediately run into bottlenecks further up the supply chains on propellants and the chemical precursors. We've all run into those, and we've had to cooperate across the people across here and the broader defense industrial base. We've had to find ways to cooperate and make sure that we're able to handle it, and a lot of that has happened. And I'll just maybe pass on to my colleague from MBDA here.
Thomas Gottschild from MBDA. Yeah, you ask, how is it going? And we see we have to do more faster, we have to do more quicker, and we are coping with that. We take that challenge very serious. We are investing. We are investing in unprecedented volume over the next 5 years of 2.4 billion euros in our infrastructures, in equipment, in production means, and so on, and also to enable our supply chain, which is the bottleneck. Actually, debottlenecking the supply chain, I think, is the key if we want to do more, and if we need to ramp up, or if you want to ramp up our production capacities. And we are also investing in our people, which is the scarcest resource. We are just hiring 2,500 roughly this year. And so we are taking this challenge serious. What we are missing so far, at least partly, is a long-term predictability, a visibility on the long-term demand, and going with this, the long-term commitment from our customers, going back to what the panel has said before. So having contracts which gives us this long-term commitment in order to support the investments in our infrastructures, in our people, I think that's what we still need to work on and what we need to do. And cooperation, of course, is helping, and I mean, good examples have been mentioned here.
Okay, my name is Morten Brandtzaeg. I'm CEO for Nammo Group. We are in the ammunition business. What has gone well? I would say the first initial ramp-up of utilizing existing capacity has gone well. We are getting the people that we need to increase capacity. We are investing about 20 times more now than we do in an average year. So there is a huge strain on our investment capacity. I support what's been said about the orders that must come more long-term. The compensation for that is subsidies, basically, from the various countries or from over-national bodies like the EU ASAP program and so on. This is now coming into place. I think it's very important that NATO and the nations have understood that capacity, if you want to fight a war for a long time, you need to have an industry behind you that has the capacity you need for a long time. This has gone well. What could we do better? I still think we need to seriously cooperate very close between industry, government, and the defense forces so that we are well coordinated. I think we must remember also not just to look at production and capacity. We need to have enough funding left to invest in R&D. Because we are seeing that if we only go into production mode now, we will lose out in the long term on R&D. So that we need profitability so we can continue to invest in that area.
I'm sure we'll come back to many of these points, but you had a great advocate on the panel with the defense ministers and the Estonian defense minister talking about the need for signed contracts. A simple question, you know, I'm the reporter here, I get to ask the questions. I know it doesn't have a simple answer. Why is it so hard to sign contracts? It seems kind of obvious. Maybe we'll go in reverse order this time. Morten?
Well, I think we should, it's on both sides, I would say, both on the industrial and on the government side. We have, during period of deep peace, have a system where it takes quite a long time to get everything in order from the government to sign production contracts. And also the ammunition has been kind of a bill payer in the period of deep peace. That's one thing. The other thing is that we can be much better in industry to not accept all these specific requirements that makes interoperability complicated. We should have one standard and make sure that this ammunition can be used in all countries.
Yeah, what makes it so hard is to come to to go actually through the different national processes, setting up the requirements, getting it harmonized with the budget cycles, then getting out the RFP, particularly when you go into competition, having the analysis and the assessment of the proposals, and then once selected, doing the negotiations on the content and the terms and conditions. I mean, this is basically the overall cycle, and that has not shortened. However, there is improvement visible. I mean, I don't want to be too overly critical that we are not signing contracts. We are signing contracts. We are signing contracts also quicker. But I think more can be done, and more can be also done not only in the acquisition process, but also in the surrounding process when it comes to the acceptance of products and getting it into the field. I think here we have still a big area of improvement.
Well, maybe just to build on that, a company like ours that obviously works for national governments in quite a number of countries around the world, it's getting a clear demand signal across our manufacturing footprint, and that's where I think the Defence Production Action Plan is an incredibly important and constructive step in the right direction. And I would just encourage everybody to move further and faster on those kind of initiatives to try and get a consolidated demand signal, common standards, as Thomas was just mentioning, so that we can, in industry, all get behind that and support that.
Maybe I'll just put a positive story on this, right? Because I agree with everything that was just said here, and I do believe you got to balance the conversation because there's culpability, frankly, on we all are responsible for the speed of contracting. But I would say there have been processes that have been put in place or initiatives, in SPA, the procurement arm of NATO on GEM-T. Right, that was actually pretty quickly done. The aggregation of demand, one country kind of leading that for 5, and that was done, relatively quickly. And of course, we need it. So I do think we have seen areas where we can go faster as industry, and we've got to just continue to lean into those.
Yeah, if you allow me, I mean, just to add on the GEM-T part. So here, Germany, under the European Gottschild initiative, has created a bundle by bringing many user nations together and creating scale with this. And this scale actually has enabled NSPA to first negotiate the contract with the joint venture we have with Raytheon, and allows us at the same time to invest into new production facilities, into new motor production facilities, which doubles actually the production volume of GEM-Ts in the world. So it's a good example.
Okay, so maybe a hint of optimism there that there will be more signed contracts. So maybe if we can come back to some of the things we discussed in the first round, the nitty-gritty of actually ramping up production, raw materials, skilled staff, building factories. Could you give the audience a sense of what it's like, what you're up against in terms of just getting the inputs that you need? I'll throw it open to whoever has the most interesting stories to jump in first. Morten?
Yeah, I think it's, number one, we are stressing our own organization to the maximum to produce as much as we can with the assets we have at the moment. At the same time, the same guys has to be the project managers for building new factories. This is not about shifts or a bottleneck, it's building new factories. And we run around to governments to find funding for this, so we can build it with a risk that the industry can live with. So it's a huge a challenge for the industry. What we do to offload that challenge is, of course, to look deeply into the supply chain and offload some of that to new players that can come and help and assist with production volume.
And maybe just to add the importance of partnerships there, I mean, back to our earlier comments, that we realize that within our supply chains that there is obviously a huge amount of overlap, and there is a real dependency on a few critical suppliers further up our supply chain. So our ability to work together, as plenty of good examples that have been mentioned already, is obviously of critical importance.
Chris? People has been a huge part of this, labor. I mean, if you think of whether you're on the commercial, aerospace side or defense, took a huge hit to experienced workforce in aerospace, in defense due to COVID. And bringing people in many cases, people who are new to the industry, there's a learning curve that has to be conquered in order to see the kind of productivity that we had been used to previously. So hiring, but not only hiring, training. It can take, in some cases, 6 months, even more, for someone to have the level of proficiency that we would need in order to see the productivity that we need. One other thing that I'll mention too, Dan, is, and we're all building capacity, which not only means you're bumping out and expanding an existing footprint or doing a greenfield, you've got to order tooling, test equipment, things that have long lead time there. One of the things that we're trying to continue to drive is maybe a little bit of a mindset change, which is like creativity over capital. Like, how do we do more with what we have? How do we streamline our processes in this incredible time of demand? I would say there was atrophy that we were all probably suffering from, and this is sort of been a wake-up call. So how do we go streamline everything that we do? So instead of having to buy that piece of capital, we can actually use the assets we have, as you were saying before, to get the kind of increases that we need, or at least an increase while we're waiting for the longer lead time items.
Thomas?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously there are bottlenecks in the supply chain, which is one of the most pressing areas. One example is the basic material for explosives, for example, where we are all, I mean, as an industry, are suffering from. There's a lot of investments in these areas, but factories need to be built. A building normally takes between 2 and 3 years, at least from the area I'm coming from. And so there is a gap which we need to overcome. I mean, the good thing is we are already 1.5 years into this gap, so probably in 1.5 years, 2 years, we see huge capacities ramping up, and hopefully the demand can be easier fulfilled than today. On the people side, it's less an issue in Germany, at least from what we experience, but obviously bringing them on board, doing the induction is always an issue.
One of the things we've heard a bit about in our reporting is NIMBYism, people not wanting a munitions plant or a defense factory near them. Is that something that you all have encountered? Is that a problem, or people understand that these things are necessary?
Well, looking at our facility, and I will speak about where I'm located as a basis, which is Schrobenhausen. It's a small city with 15,000 citizens. We are one of the biggest employer, if not the biggest there. So we have all the support of the city, of the region, and we get all the building permits. I shouldn't say that too loudly, but so far we're getting them in place to get our investments fulfilled. Overall, yes, we have this discussion, but I think we must have this discussion, and this discussion must be supported by the political level, just to keep up security and defense policy in the public domain and pushing these messages that actually defense is essential for sustainability, for coping with the changes the world is undergoing. Without security, we will never reach that.
Morten, sorry, Charles.
No, I was going to add to that. From our perspective, we haven't seen too much of that. I mean, we end up in many places being the biggest employer in the communities where we operate, and obviously being a big part of the workforce, we try and be a good employer, look after our employees, and they become the best advocates for us out in the local communities. So I have to say that particular area is not one that we've seen too many issues with.
Morten, you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we are coming from the history of producing ammunition. We are not in the middle of in the center of the big cities. So we are definitely seeing a lot of local support. I think also, but there is one aspect more I would mention in support. It's from the governments that we are not an open competition industry. It's not so that the price on artillery ammunition could be set by an auction. We are limited on profits by each government we sell to. We cannot produce ammunition on our own speculation, so that it's very tightly regulated. And these regulations, if the governments want a different way of this industry to operate, then this tight regulation must be stretched a little bit.
One of the things we touched on earlier was cooperation, partnerships. There's a big push for the industry to be more transatlantic. Very interested in your views on what is possible, what's not, especially considering the enormous pressure to buy local. I know each of you has any number of transatlantic points of cooperation, but how do you see this interplay between joining up and having to wave your national flags?
Well, it's interesting. I think when the European, defense industrial strategy was released, I think the conventional reaction was, well, it's a zero-sum game, right? Strategic autonomy means zero-sum game, and I don't believe that to be the case. And the reason I don't believe it to be the case is because we've been partnering in Europe for decades. I mean, we've got close to 1,000 tier one defense suppliers in Europe, billions of dollars in work content on some of the most critical programs out there. Think Patriot, think NASAMS, things that have been critical to Ukraine. And so for us, it's really just about enhancing a strategy that we already had in place. I think the gentleman here will tell you that we can't do what we need to do without that type of cooperation, both from a capacity perspective, but also in terms of filling technology gaps. And I think for us, we look at it as I said, an acceleration of our strategy and an opportunity, going forward. And again, I cited a couple of examples with the gentleman on stage here, and I'm excited about doing more.
Yeah, I mean, we are a genuinely transatlantic company, and I think there's lots of good examples. I can go back many years, but just in the last couple where that transatlantic relationship and the transatlantic nature of our business has helped us. And in particular, we were referring to the challenges on energetic supply and the fact that we have a presence here in the US, managing as government-owned, company-operated facilities, the energetics and propellant supplies here in the US has been very helpful for us to find alternative sources of supply as they've become so stretched in Europe. So I think we've got plenty of good concrete examples of where that transatlantic nature of our business has been a real asset for us in recent years.
Yeah, for MBDA, cooperation is a natural thing for us. We cooperate among our domestic countries for products like, for example, Storm Shadow, Scalp, or Aster, which were mentioned earlier on the panel before, or even by the Secretary General. We cooperate beyond this, like for Taurus, with Sweden, or with Meteor, or with a number of other countries. And then we have the transatlantic dimension. I mean, as Chris mentioned, with Raytheon, we have a 40-year standing joint venture with Comlock, and there's a lot of cooperation ongoing also on other systems. What I would like to see, and I mean, don't take that too bluntly, but a cooperation also from Europe to the US would be really a nice thing to have, so that it gets a little bit more balanced. I understand it's a hard thing to do, but looking from a European perspective, that would be actually nice.
Yeah, we are also a transatlantic company. We have more employees in the US than in any other country. I believe that there are, even in any kind of NATO member country, there are some pinholes in the industrial base. So, and we need to tighten those holes. So that I think in 10 years from now, we will be judged on the industrial side, how well did we cooperate in the NATO industrial base? And how well did we deliver on a bi-allied initiative?
One thing to just build upon from the last panels we were watching back there, and I think somebody made the point, you can't have capability in 32 places, right? So I do think there's an opportunity here for us to be strategic about where we go and cooperate, where we do co-production and co-development. I think, again, you have to fill technology gaps. It's got to be, has to create resiliency in your supply chain. It can't be just relying on the existing supply chain. I think it's got to serve, I think there are opportunities for centers of excellence that can serve, various countries, especially from a sustainment perspective. So I do think we also have to just be thoughtful and strategic about where we do this, and I think there's opportunity there.
One last question. We're about to run out of time, and maybe it's too big a question, but we've talked a lot about legacy production. Ukraine has shown how quickly products are evolving. How do you, while you're doing all of this, integrate the future into your products? Maybe, Chris, you take that one.
I was with the Ministry of Defense earlier, and it is humbling to be with those guys just to see how quickly they have reacted. So again, for us, it's got to be about adapting to what we're seeing out there in the field and bringing that back into our products. And then two, I think interchangeability. As people are donating things to Ukraine, how do we make sure that they are interchangeable from a replacement perspective, parts perspective? I think those are two things we all need to think about.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's remarkable the degree of innovation that we are seeing and the speed of the innovation cycle. But it ends up, and as we've seen as the conflict has progressed, being sort of additive, that you've got heavy artillery, armor, but on top of that, the drones, FPVs, and the speed of that development. So it means that the industrial bases have to be good at all of those things and adapt to the new things. From our perspective, we've been quite active on the acquisition front. I mean, some of the smaller SMEs have become very effective in the drone space, and we as a larger company at times have to look out into our supply chains for companies that have been very agile and shown capabilities there. And earlier this year we did a couple of acquisitions around that, and we're keen then to make sure that they thrive within the bigger group and we keep the same agile capabilities that they have as smaller companies.
We see a number of key technologies coming out of the Ukraine as lessons learned. And I think these future technologies and the future capabilities, they open actually up chances for corporations in addition. Because having a running production chain and wanting to cooperate is much harder than if you create something new and you start cooperation. So I think this is an area where you either grow externally, like Charles just mentioned, or you partner strategically with other companies in order to bring in these capabilities. And from an MBDA standpoint of view, we look at both angles.
I think we are in the beginning of building industrial capacity. I think we should not just fight the numbers game when it comes to weapons and artillery and so on. We should invest more than ever in R&D, and that means, of course, learning very quickly from the fight in Ukraine, but we have also other ways of learning and using technology for creating range and precision.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to discuss this. I think everybody here, and especially those people at the front line in Ukraine, are counting on you to deliver all this. So thank you very much, and thanks everyone, and we'll be back in a minute with another panel on similar issues.